Hey, it's Mike here, and today, grounding or earthing, whatever you want to call it, we're talking about connecting yourself electrically to the earth, the surface of the earth really, and that is the same phenomenon as the grounding plug in your outlets here, especially in the US. And we're gonna look at all the claims that are made around grounding, a lot of times to sell some grounding products, also just looking at the current state of science in this field, which I have to say is largely funded by the grounding product industries. And the claims are sometimes pretty shocking. We have ones ranging from changing blood markers and the earth acting as an antioxidant, all the way to accelerating wound healing and potentially treating or preventing COVID. So we're gonna go there. I also am going to whip out my multimeter / voltmeter, and we're gonna have fun measuring some electric currents when I'm touching or not touching a grounding mat that I happen to have been given. So I'm excited about that. And then I also just wanna keep it grounded, keep my feet on the ground here, and just say, I am not actually trying to debunk this. I'm not trying to promote this. I was just genuinely curious, so I decided to do a sweep of the literature, learn more about the theory of electrical stuff, the claims that they're making as an industry versus the other scientific electrical facts that are out there. And thankfully, grounding isn't harmful other than perhaps a little bit to your wallet. You know, they can be as cheap as $25 for a grounding mat, all the way up to like close to $2,000 if you want them decked out with crystals. But you get the point, let's just go. Grounding as a health practice is not accepted by the mainstream, and that's annoying because they're just saying, oh, it's not legit, but they're not actually doing perhaps high quality studies to disprove it that are independent. So we have the studies that are largely from the industry, which we'll get into later, but the main sales pitch of the grounding technique is that, you know, we've become modernized. Throughout history, our feet would be on the ground and the Earth's natural electrical charge would sort of push some electrons up into our body and help regulate us and make us healthier. I can't say our life expectancy was super high before the invention of rubber-soled shoes, which of course would insulate you from the Earth, another thing. But I understand the idea of being more and more disconnected from nature. Obviously, that has a lot of negative health impacts, but it's also beneficial to get out there in nature. We have several studies, whether or not you have rubber sole shoes, that show the benefit there. So is it being in nature or is it the actual grounding effect? And thankfully, a lot of the studies are done with grounding mats that are not done in nature. So that'll answer that maybe. But the claim that really got me interested in this as somebody that is focused on diet and antioxidants and how amazing plants are for that is the claim that the earth is actually an antioxidant force that works up through your body due to the extra electrons that are in the Earth's surface. Now we have papers like this one by a Dr. Oshman, who we're going to learn about a bit more in a second, but that brings me to a description from the Washington Post. They say, quote, "One reason direct physical contact with the ground might have beneficial physiological effects is the Earth's surface has a negative charge and is constantly generating electrons that could neutralize free radicals, acting as antioxidants." Yes, electrons have a negative charge, and fun fact, the Earth's surface generally has a negative electric charge, except when it's before or during a lightning storm that actually switches in polarity. Interesting. But back to that grounding paper, they say wearing those insulating shoes blocks you from that grounding force, which disconnects people from the Earth's electrical rhythms and free electrons. Nowadays, we gotta pay for our electrons. It's horrible. And as for antioxidants and oxidative stress, which is of course damaging to the body and promotes disease and aging, we have these free radicals that are lacking an electron in their shell. So antioxidants generally have extra electrons. Again, if you can have the Earth give you extra electrons and sort of neutralize those free radicals, then you would have less oxidative stress, everything would be good. Could literally putting your head in the sand be a great treatment for head-related issues? However, there still doesn't appear to be a study that is done that actually looks at antioxidant status before, after, during grounding. That doesn't seem to exist. But I think we need to zoom out and think about what's happening practically here. Would some electrons from your feet or the surface of your body really be able to, say, buffer the oxidative stress from an oxidized chunk of LDL cholesterol before it hits your artery wall and causes damage? That, of course, has yet to be shown, and perhaps the biggest issue has to do with the actual resistance of our body, as well as some other electrical properties. But from this paper, we're talking about our skin having like 100,000 ohms of resistance and our internal body resistance being 300 ohms. If that doesn't mean anything to you, that's okay. So the question becomes, can a meaningful amount of electrons actually make it into your body with that resistance to affect internal organ systems? And I think a logical reason for why the answer is probably no is that topical antioxidant creams, which would have a lot of free electrons, aren't a treatment for heart disease or internal organ issues. You know, those electrons on that antioxidant cream doesn't penetrate throughout your whole body. Otherwise, just covering your body in antioxidant cream would just cure all disease and prevent all aging. And another really interesting thing has to do with just how much electron flow, how much electricity flow there actually is between people and the ground when they're grounded. And thankfully, some electrical engineers went and made some instruments to actually measure this. These researchers in New Hampshire wanted to know, are these natural sort of signals like the Schumann frequency that are said to help regulate our body, do they actually show up when you're measuring any signals? And they found some kind of disappointing results. First of all, they didn't find any particular signal, but quote, the currents flowing between the human body and the ground were small, nanoamps, and they correlated with subject motion. So somebody might scratch their nose and they get a slight difference in nanoamps, which is very few electrons actually moving. We'll talk about how little that is later on. But I want to be clear, the researchers were pretty generous here, saying that just because they didn't detect any Schumann resonance or any type of signal, that doesn't mean there isn't one. But still. But now we need to talk about those authors who are paid by the industry that have done 95% of the research out there. They are Chevalier and Oshman, and they are paid by EarthFX. Oshman is the author of Energy Medicine, and under that it says he's recognized energy medicine expert who is also a physiologist, cellular biologist, and biophysicist. And I don't think these people's intentions are super bad. They don't seem to be always trying to sell things in the videos of them that I've seen, but there's still some claims that have been made that I feel are potentially dangerous, and that's the low-hanging fruit I want to hit. First, you think anybody with a scientific background would need quite a bit of high-quality scientific evidence to be making claims, but in terms of COVID prevention and severity, here he is on a relatively recent YouTube chat.
A professor at a medical school in Iraq had a bunch of patients. So he grounded some people who were around others who were infected. They didn't get infected. They didn't get full-blown COVID. So we made a guess. And looks like we were right.
Now let's look to this Iraqi study as it may be a randomized control trial and maybe some mechanistic data and on and on. Absolutely not. It is this unpublished, not peer-reviewed paper. It's really a case report where somebody saw a dramatic increase in oxygen anecdotally. And then, quote, 6 people were in contact with COVID-19 patients that had performed preventative earthing. They contracted mild or short-lived illness, although their household were severely affected. No statistical analysis, no control group, no look at, the demographics of these people's families, what other preventative things were they doing. I mean, it's just completely low-quality evidence, to say the least. And why this is dangerous is that if people think that grounding is an effective preventative measure against COVID, they just go out there, especially when cases are higher. Thankfully, they're lower in my area right now, but contracting it, and there's no evidence here that is reasonable at all to think that you're gonna be better off. But this is where things get really interesting, because in that same talk, he makes a case for there actually being a measurable electrical difference when you're grounding, and therefore, of course, these benefits could be real. And here he is with the chart.
This is body voltage without grounding, and this is with grounding. And you can see that there's a huge drop in the voltage on the body measured at different places, so it works.
And I did dig around and I found the original source, and that will be linked below if you want to look at it. It does the electrical measurements and says how they were done. So I did my research and learned how they are making these measurements, and I am able to do it with the voltmeter that I already had for doing just electrical projects, and here I am. All right, here I am with a voltmeter with the settings that I need to have. I have it on alternating current here. And then I also have the black probe hooked up to the ground. I have the grounding mat hooked up to the ground. And according to how to use a voltmeter to test your voltage, you just have to have your hand then on the red probe. And right now I'm about 1.2, 1.3 volts. And then if I put my foot on the grounding mat, I am now at 0.8, 0.9. But I've come to the realization that the little clean cover that they sell with some of these actually is enough to keep stuff from happening, because look, if I now touch it directly on the sort of rubbery mat material, I'm down at 0.05, 0.06. So it goes down way lower if I do that. But there's a lot of interesting things like standing up versus sitting down. Standing up is higher, and obviously standing is healthy. Sitting is like the new smoking, so clearly it wouldn't be like the better place to be. So yeah, it appears there was a drop in that voltage, especially when I made direct contact with that mat. We tested these same parameters for Lindy, and she was virtually identical. We tried to get some tests on Diego, the doggy, but he just sort of ate the treat on the mat and ran away. We couldn't get him in time. But this just got me really curious about everything, and so I had to measure outside as well, just stabbing into the ground, because in many of these papers, they're saying that that 60 hertz voltage is a reflection of sort of the bleeding of our AC electricity affecting the body. So what do we have here? Well, it's stabbed right into the ground, turning the meter on, going to AC, and with insulated shoes on, I am at about a 0.2 volt rate, which is significantly lower than I was inside. And then get this. That's with my foot on the ground is a dead 0. So that's really interesting. But again, we're actually measuring the voltage difference between the ground and myself. So that's worth mentioning. It's gonna be closer together. But do these changes mean that my thought process earlier was wrong, that there are electrons moving throughout our body in enough of amount to make a difference? And that brings me back to how voltage, again, does not equate to the amount of electrons moving. And the best example of that is when you're walking on the rug and building up static electricity, you are reaching like 20,000 volts, enough to arc the air and create that shock, but you're only creating about 1,000th of an amp worth of current, and by contrast, your plug is probably 15 or 20 whole amps. So that one voltage drop doesn't necessarily mean anything, and especially when you consider when they measured the amount of electrons flowing between the ground and people in that electrical engineering experiment, and that was only 10 nanoamps. So we've got our amps, our milliamps, our microamps, and then our nanoamps. So we're talking about like 0.0000001 amps. I don't know how many zeros that was, but it was probably about right. And that's possibly the biggest issue here, is that there's no indication that like a half a volt or a 1 volt drop would have any health effect. And to completely play devil's advocate, there are several studies actually showing a benefit for heart disease, for example, by electrically stimulating the body, and that's with 2 volts, 2.5 volts, and more than 10 nanoamps of current. And looking to this study, it's also worth mentioning that they are doing that during surgery or with some electrified acupuncture to get it into the right spot. Another supporting piece of evidence that just putting things on skin doesn't necessarily work for the human body. And such heart disease studies in humans have shown a lowering of oxidative stress with electrical stimulation. So pretty much the opposite of what's going on here. Maybe a higher voltage is healthier. All right, now I'm gonna do a sort of quick review of the main research in this field, and this could be an hour-long video, so I'm sorry for truncating some of these study analyses, but let's get to the first one, which is probably one of the most popular one that's promoted. It's 2004, and it is about people with sleep disturbances actually improving their cortisol metrics by grounding. In this case, it was a lower nighttime cortisol and a regulation of the cortisol cycle, the study claims. Here's a chart of everybody's cycle sort of overlaid, and you can see the before and after, and the after looks more regulated. But I have to mention, this was not a randomized control trial. They did not have a control group. They did not have a placebo. And of course, it was pretty small. And the claim here again is that the Schumann resonance and other just electrical signals from the ground regulate circadian rhythm. Again, 10 nanoamps. I don't know about that. It's also possible that doing a study on a potential benefit to their sleep could just, through placebo, increase sleep. Placebo is very powerful. That's why we have control groups. Anyway, moving on. Again, we have those industry-tied researchers whose names are on pretty much all the studies, Chevalier and Oshman, which brings me to this study on blood viscosity. And this one gave me pause because not only were they showing an improvement in viscosity or the thinness or thickness of blood, they also claimed that there was a voltage change of the blood cells from grounding. But there's a bit of a problem here. First of all, they recruited 10 people through word of mouth, which makes them really ripe for placebo. Once again, they did not have a placebo or control group here, but they had them ground for 2 hours and they took blood samples before and after that. And then they used a little slide with blood on it and measured the voltage difference across it. They saw a little bit of a change there. And you would think, oh my God, placebo alone can't change our blood voltage. Well, as they even mention here, it is accepted that blood viscosity and resistance to blood flow are related basically to high blood pressure. So it's a situation where they could be relaxed because they're getting a treatment. Their blood pressure could lower, that can lower viscosity, and with lower friction, maybe it changes the actual voltage of the blood a little bit. They also have a paper that includes accelerated wound healing, and the theory that I heard Chevalier describe was that the electrons that are coming from the earth actually help power the mitochondria of your cells, which allows them to create a healing effect faster.
But they also are able to give energy to the power unit of the cell, which is called mitochondria. So that means that your healing capabilities will increase.
But these are completely anecdotal case reports. We have this guy who got injured in the Tour de France. They did grounding and that looks better, but they have no comparison. They also have this woman with this long-term wound that healed up. Again, completely anecdotal, no comparison. And it is worth mentioning that placebo is super powerful. As I've said before, sham or fake knee surgery was shown to be as effective as real knee surgery from this paper. But moving on, thankfully, there are some randomized control trials that have been done on the subject of grounding. And this first one was actually co-authored by Deepak Chopra, but also with some of the same researchers and funded by EarthFX. This looked at massage therapist pain and quality of life, and on its face, randomized control trials claiming that there's less pain and these other benefits. Oh my God, this is legit. It even has a sham or fake treatment, but then I realized that the way they did it has a bit of an issue, and that is that they didn't actually have a placebo group and a non-placebo group. They did this weird time series thing where they started off for 1 week with the sham, they had a few weeks with the real grounding thing, and then a final week with a sham again. This makes it impossible to delineate different time-related effects, whether there was a good season, bad season, or other thing like that, for example. And one that sticks out is they looked at the number of massages per week, and for whatever reason, during the first week of having the grounded treatment, the massages go way down, so these massage therapists are gonna have way less stress on their hands and probably less pain during that period. So for that reason, I'm a little bit skeptical of those results. Moving on to another EarthFX funded study. This time it was on muscle damage as indicated by creatine kinase, which is supposed to be a metabolic byproduct of muscle damage. They essentially had 16 people who were given real grounding and 16 people that were given fake grounding. And the result is they say that there was a decrease in this muscle damage marker in the grounded group, but then when you look closely from this chart, it was only statistically significant on one of the days in terms of the difference between groups. 3 out of 4 of the days had no difference. Now, it's likely that if they looked at this as a single comparison metric across the whole several day period, that it wouldn't be statistically significantly different, but this is sort of potentially accidentally doing P hacking or probability hacking, where you just have more data points and eventually one will be statistically significant. And the final randomized control trial, which again on its face, pun completely intended, seems persuasive, and that is on facial blood flow with grounding. They say that there was more facial blood flow in the real grounding group versus the sham grounding group. Again, this is a randomized trial, and the idea is more blood flow to the face is good. I think that is something that we can agree on here, but instead of doing some like larger statistical analysis between groups, I didn't see that in the study. They just seem to go over like person by person and sort of show their thermal imaging and a chart. So I would like to know, if you put everybody's numbers together in each group, is there actually a statistically significant difference? They didn't claim that there was, so I'm suspicious that there isn't. In the end, I have to reiterate that there is not really good research proving that grounding does not work. Again, looking at the theoretical like amounts of current and on, it seems very unlikely. I wish it would work. It's a cool concept. If there was something that was that easy that could help people out in terms of their blood markers and wound healing and all these things, that would be amazing. But the evidence seems to all be flawed in some sense or another. So, all of the randomized control trials were smaller and seem to have a major flaw, at least in my opinion. And that's beyond the actual industry funding for every single one, which we can't forget about. And I have to once again reiterate that the amount of current that is created by, say, walking on a carpet and getting some static electricity is probably about 100,000 times more than the amount that is recorded through grounding in terms of those 10 nanoamps. So it's very unlikely that there's this flow of electrons from the earth that is large enough to overcome the resistance of the body and just fight off the oxidative stress that is occurring. And that's my concern, is that by hearing these amazing benefits of grounding and not really understanding how much scientific evidence there is, people might over rely on the benefits of grounding that they think exist and then ignore basic things like nutrition. And I really think the worst negative that could happen with grounding, though, is developing a type of OCD where you feel like you really need to ground, otherwise bad things are going to happen. That can be raising anxiety, which we know has really palpable negative physiological effects. But that being said, if you can be chill about it and you just enjoy being connected to a grounding mat, or especially going outside, obviously that is going to help, unless you're just getting exposed to a bunch of sunlight and getting sunburned and increasing your risk of skin cancer. But I am kind of sad because there was glimmers when I was researching of, oh my God, this might actually be doing something, only to then be disappointed by looking at major flaws in these studies. Because it'd be cool if it worked. Anyway, let me know what you think about all of this. Have you tried grounding? Do you think it's something that is real? Do you think these 10 nanoamps of current are enough to lower oxidative stress in the body, and on and on? And that's it for today. Feel free to like, subscribe, share the video, all those good things, and thanks for watching.